everybody. We have this first global cryptocurrency conference, and I think it's a very appropriate time to get into this technology space. And business world thought about doing it for quite some time, and finally we have come up with these two panels in today evening. And very distinguished panel we have. Panel one is we have Arvind Nair, a senior advocate from Delhi High Court and Supreme Court of India, who is somebody who has been working on the technology space. Pratibha Jain, who is a partner and heads Nishit Desai Delhi, and she is her firm is one of the pioneer firm in technology and other life sciences space. Ajit Mishra is also here, and Ajit Mishra is presently a solicitor in the United Kingdom, and he regularly advises on e-gaming, e-sports, as well as cryptocurrency, and he has been doing some assignments on blockchain. Apurva Bose, who has been working on technology space, she's a human rights lawyer as well, based in Geneva, and I am somebody who's trying to assemble this entire distinguished panel and talk to them, decode this entire thing. I'll try to make it simple because we have an audience which is more of business and less of law. But we have a distinguished panel of lawyers first, then the business panel where we have founders of VajiRax and Bosagora founder Serge is there. So what I'll suggest that we need to first understand what is this cryptocurrency. And the moment you say currency, the word comes as if it's some kind of coin or some kind of actual coin. But this is a virtual coin you're talking about. You're talking about a virtual currency. And this is very democratic in its nature. That's what my limited understanding about cryptocurrency is. Whatever work we have done in the last 6 to 8 months, I realized that this is something which is going to get propelled in next months, not even in years. And that's the timeline I'm looking at. So with this background, I think I will first start with Apurva. The reason is she is based in Geneva and she has seen this sector very closely for almost 1 year. She was one of the first initiator for me who told me about this whole cryptocurrency thing a year back, and I was absolutely novice about it. But now when I see so many Indian companies coming into this space and their integration happening with the world level company, I can very well see that there is a deep connect across the globe about this cryptocurrency. So Apurva, will you decode, make it simple, what is the script of cryptocurrency?
Firstly, thank you so much for introducing me, and thank you so much for giving me the space. I'm indeed in awe to be amidst such august company. Again, I would like to give a disclaimer right at the start. I'm also quite new to the cryptocurrency industry, and I don't consider myself an expert in any way. But as a human rights lawyer and as somebody who lives in Switzerland and who has seen this industry up close, I'd like to first sort of establish the fact that we do live in an increasingly unstable world, with especially COVID hitting us and of course affecting us in unprecedented ways. So if we ever have to imagine in a post-COVID world, if ever there is, I think what's pivotal to understand is that we're moving closer to decentralization and self-reliance. And cryptocurrency and blockchain technology would, of course, bring this increased connectivity and transparency in our daily exchanges and supply chains. So when COVID hit us, one of the first things that I noticed is how resilient cryptocurrency proved to be. And various sectors, if we look at healthcare, if we look at education, finance, etc., everyone started looking at things from a different perspective and started looking at different solutions for the novel problems that we suddenly had to face. And we started noticing how people came up with solutions such as using blockchain technology to even deploy and ship medicines to COVID-stricken regions. And also maybe in the near future we'd have blockchain technology used to track COVID-19 testing and vaccinations as well. So when we look at India in this, when we look at India and cryptocurrency industry, there is this, increased notion of mistrust and vagueness that shrouds this industry especially. And so what's important, as Sudhir sir now said, is to sort of define what cryptocurrency is and incorporate a concise mechanism which will, of course, build trust and belief in the system. So, what's important right now is to have a regulatory mechanism which would, sort of put in place a monitoring system to sort of supervise the daily operations. And so as a human rights lawyer, one of the first things that I'd like to sort of establish is how UN and other international organizations have sort of been, inching closer to adopting cryptocurrency. So in recent years, it's undertaken initiatives that incorporates artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and blockchain technology. And most of these, solutions have been in the experiment stage. But recently, UNICEF, established something called the Cryptocurrency Fund, which I consider to be, one of the biggest finds of the year. And so what they basically did is they, started receiving donations in two cryptocurrency, Bitcoin and Ether, as donations. So I think crowdfunding using cryptocurrency is something that international organizations are looking at, because the speed of transfer operations, the transmission of funds makes cryptocurrency something, which is interesting, which is an interesting, like an option, especially while dealing with international emergencies and other crises. So I feel like cryptocurrency does not exist just in the world of finances, but also in, in the world of in development aid, for that matter. So, of course, there is, increased, association of cryptocurrency with illicit activities and money laundering, et cetera, which does exist. Of course, there is a lot of scams as well. And that's exactly why it must be regulated. Because, a lot of institutions, let's say the Red Cross, NGOs such as TECO, Save the Children, the Water Project, etc., has started using cryptocurrency in their daily operations. So I feel like it's pretty much, inevitable, and India must actually come up with a regulatory mechanism rather than ban them.
I will come back to you, Apurva. I know you will put a deeper connect between human rights, democracies, and cryptocurrency, and that's something we'll go deeper in the second round. I will come to Arvind Nair, senior advocate, who has been working on the technology space, a lot of law firms brief him. In fact, we have been giving him a work which is very much connected with the entire technology part of, which is not equivalent to cryptocurrency, but this is something which we create a technology framework. Arvind, what do you think we are as a country, India, if we talk about India specifically, after the Supreme Court order on cryptocurrency in March 2020, what is the stand of the government? And what is the crux of the Supreme Court of India's order? And will it facilitate business of cryptocurrency and the cryptocurrency exchanges? Is there some movement happening there?
Thank you for that introduction. Before I directly answer your question, let me just say, I think Apurva has very eloquently sort of given an introduction about cryptocurrency, saying about the experimental part of it and the fact that it is the way forward. I think we all know that the only constant that exists in the world, especially after this surreal COVID hit time, is change. So this change is definitely going to come. I think just to sort of give a comparative view, I think it's not been more than 5 years when people who were using their laptops in the courts, in the High Court or the Supreme Court, to address the courtroom were few and far between. In fact, if I go back 5 years in time, I probably saw only 1 or 2 people in the High Court holding their laptops and trying to address the honorable judges. But now, we are all doing everything by means of technology and by VC and so on and so forth. So this is definitely the way forward, because this is one pandemic. I think the governments, the statutory regulators, the various industries that are hit by it will hereinafter also sort of prepare for similar issues. I think if you look at the United Nations, after the Second World War, the United Nations was strengthened. So I think once a catastrophe hits, that's when the world starts to prepare for it. So in that view, I think the use of Bitcoin technology, cryptocurrency, the mining processes, the technical innovations per se, it's going to really increase, and it's going to probably hit the roof at a pace that we can't probably anticipate, or we are in the process of anticipating. Your question about the Honorable Supreme Court, how did the Supreme Court come in? 2013 is the time from when the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India started their. That's around the time when their gaze first came onto this field and this line. That's when they started coming out with their notifications. There were various notifications, and there was a notification in 2017. Finally, 2018, there was a notification which sort of directly didn't hit cryptocurrency, but it had an indirect effect in the sense that the banks and other financial institutions were prohibited from doing any business with those entities that were dealing in cryptocurrency. So that's how that challenge took place from the Internet and Mobile Association of India. To my mind now, although I was not involved in that litigation, I have gone through that judgment. I've seen it earlier. I've again looked at it. I think the Honorable Supreme Court has done a fantastic balancing act, because if you see the components of the challenge, and if you see the stand of the Reserve Bank of India, what emerges from a study of the judgment is the Honorable Supreme Court agreed with most of the submissions made by the Reserve Bank of India, in the sense that the Supreme Court said that the Reserve Bank of India does have the power to regulate virtual currency because there is potential for this to be used as a medium of exchange. The Honorable Supreme Court also said that this is not a violation of Article 19(1)(g) because there are reasonable restrictions, as we all know, can be imposed. However, nevertheless, in this brilliant balancing act, the Honorable Supreme Court struck down the notifications, saying, primarily on the ground of reasonableness and proportionality, the logic being that in the last 5 years, the government or other statutory authorities that are involved had not found any evidence or any specific cases where there had been any misuse. This, I think, sort of indicates that the Honorable Supreme Court has taken a very, very broad view, has taken a very progressive view. This means that there is no prohibition or no discouraging for this technology to grow. So the only way forward for this technology is growth, probably exponential growth in the pandemic. However, the Honorable Supreme Court has also made it clear that the statutory authorities, and especially the Reserve Bank of India, are not going to be prohibited or precluded from trying to moderate, trying to control, or trying to influence the use of technology in any way, with the underlying principle being public interest. So as far as protection of public interest is concerned, they will be within their rights to come out with stipulations. I think what's going to happen with any technology that is dynamic in nature is that there is going to be a lot of wait and see, there's going to be a lot of action and reaction. We are going, as its usage proliferates, and as more and more organizations start to look at it as legal tender, that's when you're going to have a lot of stipulations. That I think is the balancing act, which was by no means simple.
Brilliant. Very good. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Arvind, for starting this on such a broad spectrum about India you gave. And in the next panel, I can promise when the next panel will be of the founders, and there'll be Indian founders and the global founders like Serge Komarami. Serge Komarami is a thinker in the cryptocurrency thing. For the world over, people know him as, and we got him in this, and he'll be in the next panel. But you have nicely said that there is a deep interconnect, and as a large democracy, Indian courts have been very progressive and they have taken a stand. Now let's go to the pulse of all this. We need to know the pulse where the Indian business is moving forward, and who better can tell us than Pratibha Jain, because her firm is a technology leader in the legal space, and she will know the pulse where this whole cryptocurrency thing is actually hitting on the ground, and how the business is coming, how business houses are coming for advices on cryptocurrency, and what are the bottlenecks she feels would be there, and how this will become a thing of future. Pratibha, all yours.
Thanks, Sudhir. Actually, very refreshing to hear a discussion which starts with the premise that how do we get cryptocurrency, legitimized and regulated in the country. I don't think anybody is denying the requirement for regulation, but definitely a need for recognition is what we've been working with the industry now for many years now. As you know, we've also involved in the Supreme Court case on behalf of the industry organization, IMAI. I remember, when my litigation colleagues came to me with this, I was like, my God, this is going to be such an uphill task to get this through the courts. But like Arvind said, we were very proud of the Supreme Court that day when the judgment came. Because I think the proportionality test really gave hope, not just for the cryptocurrency businesses, but in general, as technology advancement happens, this is something. In fact, in the judgment, there was a concept of neti neti, the Vedic concept that was mentioned by the Honorable Court. The concept of neti neti is an expression of something inexpressible, but which seeks to capture the essence of that to which no other definition applies. And this conundrum, according to them, would squarely apply in the concept of would apply to cryptocurrencies. And that is so beautifully said, right? To your initial question, Sudhir, of how do you define cryptocurrencies? It's such a and this is true for pretty much any of the technology spaces we are working in currently. The law is a lagger in terms of the technological advancement happening in the world. You can't keep catching up. And so the typical stance of regulating technology similar to how you regulate the other sectors is just not going to work, because technology will always be ahead of law. That's what we keep discussing with the regulators. And the only way to do this is going to be a principle-based approach. And key to that is principle of harm. And that's what the Supreme Court also looked at. That as long as there's no harm that you can show that has happened, then your regulation currently is not proportionate, right? So if you can look at a principle-based approach to technology, including cryptocurrencies, and use broad, if you look at the Indian Penal Code, it's so old, but there are hardly any amendments you make to it because it's principle-based. There's simple principles of harm embedded in every provision. That's how you've got to look at technology, and that's the discussion we've been having with the regulators. In terms of businesses, there are various business models that got affected, and most of the people in the next panel are existing clients of the firm. And it was really unfair because, we had worked really hard with them in terms of setting up, very, very robust. There was the self-regulation of the exchanges, the cryptocurrency exchanges in India was very high. It was higher than, some of the other sectors that are regulated. Because when you're highly regulated, you try and find loopholes. When it wasn't regulated, we were all scared, saying, anybody can come to us for anything. So let's be prepared and have very high levels of self-regulation. And that's what, we had very high KYC standards. And that's why no wrongdoing was found by RBI. So, but it's very difficult for these businesses to operate in an environment of uncertainty. And we still have the Garg Committee report sword hanging on our heads. Even though the Garg Committee report was penned down before the judgment came, so I think the government will find it very difficult to implement it now. But they still haven't negated it, and they keep making references to it. In that kind of regulatory uncertainty that exists today, it's very difficult for us to even come up with business structures that can scale up. Because till you have a legitimacy that is provided, getting investors becomes very difficult. And I'm sure, all these discussions will happen in the next panel, and the founders can tell us,
Yes.
the problems they face in terms of even just getting, whether bank funding or, investments. That's what and it's really unfortunate, right? Because Apurva sitting in Switzerland, I was there for the World Economic Forum. The whole world was talking about moving forward with technology. How do you use cryptocurrencies to bring progress to the world, to provide decentralization, to strengthen democracy, and to forget everything else, right? The economic sense of it for developing countries. Today, the cost of doing business, just the transactional cost, is 4 to 5% in India. You will save right there in terms of getting investors to commit to the Indian economy if you're saving 4 to 5% just in transaction cost. And forget everything else. When the world is moving forward, and on my panel in the World Economic Forum in Davos, we had people from Switzerland who were looking so far ahead in terms of what you can do with crypto. And I was feeling so bad because we have the brains to do it. We have the infrastructure to do it. But just because of this regulatory uncertainty, India is going to stay far behind in this.
So very well. But what you said is the takeaway point for me in the first round is that law will be ahead than the business will be ahead than law and the governance. And that has been the case of the rise of Bangalore and the rise of IT, where despite governance, we did so well on IT. So I am hoping against hope that with the kind of founders we have in this country and their integration with the global ecosystem is happening, the government will come around and it will become a little easier. So I'll get to Mr. Ajit Mishra now, solicitor in London, in the first round. Ajit, can you see me? Ajit, I think Ajit had joined. Yeah, Apurva, you set it up very nicely. Everybody agrees that you really told us that what actually is the ABCD of it. So when Pratibha nails it to the problematic area for us as a country, especially she was talking about India, that despite the Supreme Court judgment and there's still some favorable companies trying their best in the prevailing circumstances. If I ask you, what are the success stories of cryptocurrency? Which are the jurisdictions in the world? Which are the shining examples and how they have succeeded? One, which are the successes and how they have succeeded? That can be a roadmap for Indian companies.
Of course. I live in Switzerland, where cryptocurrency is not seen as something which is alien. There are places here where you can buy a cup of coffee and with cryptocurrency. So it's not something which it's a concept that's almost regularized for us. So Switzerland even has adopted a blockchain act, which is ratified and which may come into force next year. So that's how ahead we are. And so as someone who knows Serge, who will be speaking in the next panel, I'm sure he will have more to say about how Switzerland has adopted cryptocurrency and how we're so far ahead when it comes to regularizing the use of it. So I think we've all sort of come to consensus in the fact that the world is moving towards a crypto-friendly system. And one of the things that I noticed is how even the concept of taxation is quite structured in Switzerland, and I think that itself shows how we in Switzerland have sort of understood what cryptocurrency industry is, and also realized how this is a new reality, and we must sort of adopt our jurisdiction in order to accept it.
I will ask you one more supplementary question because I thought you will speak a little more. What is your definition of this is something which is very passionate to you? What is the democratic part of cryptocurrency. Why it is so, you feel you connect democracy and cryptocurrency very deep. How do you see that?
I think the main factor is the very core of cryptocurrency, which is that it is decentralized, and the transparency with which cryptocurrency stands. So I think these two concepts sort of, like make way, or it sort of paves path for a democratic structure. Like even when you look at, sort of making donations using blockchain and cryptocurrency, transparency is something which I think is pivotal to it. And the very fact that, you can sort of trace the transactions and how everything is decentralized is something which I think it's sort of the crux of what a democratic structure is. So, yeah.
Very good. Arvind, I'll come to you. And we had a very good first round done. And the second round, we are moving towards finding solutions. And she says that Switzerland has very good tax structure. In India, we have a problem with the tax structure because we chase people sometime after many, many years, sometime after a decade, and that becomes the issue. So tax structure is something we'll sort out at the end. I believe when we actually, the Indian company will start making money. That's where as a country, sometimes we react. But tell me, if you have to see a picture ahead, where do you see the regulatory mechanism coming? Is Pratibha's apprehensions are right? And do you feel that the kind of employment crisis we are seeing in this country and the kind of dearth of new ideas which we have an issue today, naturally, you'll be looking at it from a point of view that how the new technology and the new, and since we have an integration with our existing technological excellence in South Asia, which we are better than most of our neighboring countries, and we have a democracy, which is very, very beneficial for cryptocurrency. So where do you see this journey going, Arvind?
Pratibha is absolutely right. She said she was at the World Economic Forum, and she was a little worried that India may again end up playing catch up on this. But Apurva gave the example of Switzerland. Along with Switzerland, I'd also like to give the example of a place like Canada, which specifically accepts and allows the use of digital currency for stores and for organizations which accept it. But having said that, even in Canada, it's not accepted as legal tender. Now, let's not for a moment lose sight of the fact, Sudhir, that there is always an elapse of time in which the regulation catches up with the innovation. If we look at Switzerland, London, Canada, these are places which Switzerland, for instance, has been the center of the world financial market for about 100 years. India only got free in 1947. I do share Pratibha's concern, but I'm very optimistic that in this case, our catch-up will be much faster. And my reason for saying that is another space where I am personally very active. It's the arbitration space.
Yes.
When we went out for seminars and conferences in Europe or in American conferences, let's say, 2005, 2010, 2012, we experienced a lot of angst about how the Indian arbitration system, despite the amendments of 96, was lagging behind. They said it takes so long for the challenges, so on and so forth. But now in the last 3 to 5 years, if we see, in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a slew of amendments in the Arbitration Act, just so that we can catch up, just so that when our authorities call out for foreign direct investment, nobody should be held back because of the slowness of our alternate dispute regulation structure. So I think we are going to catch up. Of course, our pace may not be as quick as Switzerland or Canada or France or Germany. But then, you used the word democratic. I think our pace is going to be much better, learning from the arbitration experience, learning from the experience of the way we have tinkered recently with our corporate taxes, but keeping the fact that I think our sheer diversity of population, our varied interests when it comes to state governments, when it, just look at the number of varied interests that we have. Look at the number of people we have. So there, I think some sort of personal innovation. You also mentioned Bangalore becoming an IT hub, but that probably also had something to do with the personal predilection of the people who were settled there. So I think that democratic part of it is what sort of slows down our pace at times. But it's sort of imbibed in our constitution. It's there in our political structure. So we can't really wish it away. We need to become faster, but we have those safeguards which work for better or for worse. They also work positively. They also work negatively when it comes to innovation. But I think we probably will catch up much faster, although it does remain an area of concern.
Brilliant. Thank you, Arvind. And before I go to Pratibha, I have few questions which have already come to us. So why I'm saying them now, because all three of them are addressed to Apurva Bose. So I'm just giving her time to prepare these questions, because they have been. So first is Rishikesh Induri, who has written, Apurva mentions democracy, transparency are key highlights of cryptocurrency. Will it mean that in a country like India can use it better for tackling corruption issues especially? The second question is, Apurva, if Switzerland's coffee shop permit one to buy coffee with crypto, how does the regulator there tax crypto holding? Is it taxed as income? Good questions. Just see the quality of these are practical questions. And the third one is also like that. Apurva, can you please tell us, and that is Tahseen Khan has asked the third question and Raj Shekhar has asked the second question. Third question by Tahseen Khan. Apurva, can you please tell us as to what broadly the Blockchain Act of Swiss contains? So I'll come back to you. So be with them, and I will go back to Pratibha again and ask Pratibha that what do you make out of this? You think it's a very productive debate we have started, because since the judgment came, we were in lockdown. It came virtually just before lockdown, this judgment came of the Supreme Court. And I feel that you are witnessing a lot of action, and I was aware about it that Nishit Desai would be witnessing a lot of action, a lot of queries. So even if you have your apprehensions in mind, but your 2 decades of extensive practice in the corporate area, do you see some silver lining at the end of it?
You always see a silver lining at the end of it. Otherwise, you would just give up and go home. No, we've come, very far. Even before the Supreme Court case, we had worked very closely with the industry to go and talk to the government about, because, the Garg committee report indications were already there with the industry, which, for those who don't know, the Garg committee report actually recommends banning of cryptocurrencies and has a lot of other problems. The definition of crypto is very, very broad, and it's an absolute ban. And the reasoning given there are also not understanding necessarily the issues that are faced by the industry or how the industry works. I think, given the amount of interaction that the industry has had with the government, even in recent times, I know that the policy bodies have written to the government asking for, again, ensuring that there is a regulation and not a ban. I am hopeful, and especially now with the Supreme Court judgment, I'm very hopeful that the government is not going to now look at actually implementing the Garg committee report. But the problem that happens, Sudhir, is in the meantime, you're in the no man's land, because neither have you got. So the Supreme Court has struck down the circular for not being, proportionate. But at the same time, we don't have a final word from the government or the RBI as to, what's next. And that's what's really hurting the business. I think as soon as, or maybe hopefully, it's just been a month that all the industry bodies wrote to the government on this again. I think the lockdown, there are a lot of other issues that the government's dealing with, so that might not be on priority. but I am very hopeful that we will see discussions, and that's why I'm very glad that we are having this discussion, because this can then help feed into that or help promote the government to come out and have that discussion as to what the regulations should look like, rather than sitting quiet on it. I'm also seeing some questions on Sandbox. We had actually recommended for all the fears that the government had, a sandbox model for cryptocurrencies also, like they have done for certain other sectors, and see how that works out. To help them explain and show how this will work, especially exchanges, especially seeing it as an asset rather than a currency that works in tandem with currency. So we are not even going to the extent of buying coffee. We are just saying treat it as another asset, and so you recognize it as the exchanges as commodity exchanges are recognized. So there are various other ways of regulating the cryptocurrency world without considering it as a currency, as a threat to the global or the national currency, and seeing it as a business by itself and an inherent value in that. And a lot of the concerns around, so for example, the concerns are that there's a lot of speculative transaction, for example, or anti-money laundering concerns. All of those were concerns when you set up the securities market.
Yeah.
Right? And over time, you develop the regulation around it, but you don't ban it. And so that's, I think, the ask of the industry.
Yes.
And I think once we can provide them a framework in which we can operate, which we already have to a certain extent. We've already provided the KYC standards. We've already provided research on how it works globally. So I think based on that, I am very hopeful that something positive will come.
Okay, Pratibha, I have one question for you also, actually. So I would rather prefer you answer them before we go to Apurva and then finally to Arvind. Saurabh Baweja asks from you that what is the procedure and approximate time to list token on cryptocurrency platforms in India, and what is the approximate cost for the same?
So actually, it varies from platform to platform, but I think the time is directly proportionate to the amount of time taken for KYC, etc. So per se, it's not a very prohibitive process if you've got all your KYCs in process, and now with Aadhaar, things are much easier. The costing, actually, I honestly don't know, because we represent the exchanges rather than the people who are investing with. If you write to me, I can find out and let you know.
Great. So we will come back to you on that. Okay, Apurva, you have only 1 minute to answer all the 3 questions. Yeah, 1 to 2 minutes. Yeah.
So when we talk about like cryptocurrency and blockchain preventing fraud and corruption, yes, I think it reduces the cost of enforcement, and this is mainly thanks to like the easily accessible information and faster cross check. So if I'm not wrong, the UNDP in India is actually using blockchain technology to record land registry, to make it more transparent and accountable. So yes, I think it can counter the problem of corruption. I'm not an expert on taxation laws, so but it is listed under wealth tax. But with respect to taxation, it depends on the canton where you're from.
Yes.
So it differs from canton to canton, but it is listed under wealth tax.
Yes.
Talking about the Blockchain Act, it is something which is currently not available to the public, but the laws or the act is basically used as a mode to counter money laundering. And so it does come under the Money Laundering Act here, but it is not currently open to the public.
Thank you, Apurva. Well done. Okay, I can see Dr. Anurag Batra has already come to moderate the next panel, but I'll have to go to my senior advocate, Arvind Nair, to have the final one minute to him. Yeah, Arvind.
I heard again what Pratibha said about taking it as an asset, and I was just looking at my little pointer note. I think we can, in this case, we can take a lot of guidance from how the Canadian system has worked, because Canada is also politically similar to India. It's an inclusive democracy. Now, Canada allows the use of digital currencies. Canada does not recognize this as legal tender. Canada's tax laws and rules also apply to digital currency transactions. Digital currencies are subject to income tax there. Also, I just checked, the Canada Revenue Agency also says that GST, HST will apply on the goods and services that you buy using digital currency. So I think in this case, we could probably, so that we don't waste valuable time in regulating, we could take guidance from a system which seems to be a few steps ahead of us in organizing this and in regulating this. And they look at it as a commodity, which sort of tallies with what Pratibha said about looking at it as an asset. So I think the future is exceptionally bright, and also, of course, some time will be taken, and I think we remain optimistic. We have guiding principles, Switzerland, Canada, other jurisdictions, and we can sort of catch up on this really quickly.
Wonderful, thank you. And I thank Apurva, Pratibha, and Arvind, and also Ajit Mishra, who joined, but he was not getting a good connection. We'll bring him back in some other program. And thanks a lot for this wonderful discussion on legal issues. You really set up the debate.